All right, so we're doing 1-4, distance and midpoint. Before, when we talked about midpoint, it was just talking about on a straight number line. What is the midpoint? It's the middle of the line where the two sides are going to be equal to each other. But sometimes it's not just a straight flat line like the x-axis, such as what we're doing today. We're going to have a slanted line on the xy coordinate plane. All right, so all of you guys in the back on your phones, you should probably put those down and do notes. Thank you. All right, we're not going to worry about simplifying the radical. You're going to have a calculator all the time. If you want to do decimals, that's fine. I'm not stressing on that part right there. That's not the important part today. So, like I said before, we had it on a flat number line. Finding the midpoint, it's in the middle, right? There's M. That's the midpoint. So -1 on this case is the midpoint. But when it's slanted on the xy coordinate, like if we want to find the middle, well, 0, 0, and 2, 8, that's really not this example. You would have a formula. And our formula, you have a part for x's and a part for y's. So for x's, you're going to say x1 plus x2 divided by 2. So that's the average of the x's. So x1 is saying the x coordinate of the first point. The 2 on the bottom is called a subscript when it's on the bottom, is the x coordinate of the second point. And then you add them together, divide by 2. You're taking the average of the x values. And then you're going to do the same thing for the y's. y2 plus y1, add them together, divided by 2. So then here's the example. It doesn't matter which point you call point 1 and which point you call point 2, as long as you stay consistent. So I'm going to go ahead and say that A is my point 1. So my xy is x1, y1. Okay? And then my second point B is x2, y2. So both, that's the 2 stands for the second point, and it doesn't matter which one you call point 1 and point 2. All right, so now I'm going to use my formula. This part doesn't change. I always go in with the stuff that doesn't change, and then I fill in the blanks of everything that does change. All right, so I know I'm going to do the x's separate from the y's. So my x1 is 0, and my x2 is 2. And then my y1, y1 is 0, and my y2 is 8. So I have my 2 x coordinates and my 2 y coordinates. When I add 0 plus 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. So I have 1. That's the x of the midpoint. 0 plus 8 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So my midpoint is at 1, 4. And that is the formula method, but I'm going to show you another way. So like your cheat code method, okay? Midpoint formula is actually a pretty easy formula. If you want to use that one, that's fine. It doesn't really matter if you're adding them together. I did x1 plus x2 and y. Oh, I did do it backwards, didn't I? Yeah, it doesn't really matter because you're just adding them together and then dividing by 2. But later on, we're going to do fractional distance, where we go like a quarter of the way or 3/4 of the way. And that's when the shortcut method that I'm going to show you really comes in handy because it makes it a lot easier. And so I'll go ahead and show you it now with midpoint where it's half. That's the fractional distance of half. But if you want to use formula, go for it. That's fine. All right, so find the coordinates of the midpoint. Always identify what you're solving for. Not all of these questions ask for the same piece. Find the coordinates of the midpoint of line segment CD with endpoints of C at -4, 2 and D at 8, 7. So you're given both endpoints. So I'm going to do endpoint C, and then in a vertical line, I'm going to put endpoint D down here. Okay? C is at -4, 2. So I'm going to put the X's on the left, -4, and 2 on the right for +2. That's the coordinates, -4, 2. You've probably never seen it written like this because this is not an official way of teaching anything. This is just a very easy way of doing it. But it works the same. D, 8, 7. So I put 8 on the left and 7 on the right. So my X's are all on the left and my Y's are all on the right, and I can treat them separately and instead of trying to plot it on an XY grid and dealing with diagonal lines and all that. What's in the middle of them that I'm looking for? The midpoint, right? So M for me stands for midpoint, and I put it in between, in the middle of C and D. So I'm going to look at these separately. If I start at -4 and I want to end up at 8, +8, how many spaces do I need to move and in what direction? So let's start with direction. Am I going to go in the positive or negative direction? The positive direction, right? To get from -4 to +8, I need to go in the positive direction. And how many steps do I need to take? I like to think of this as walking. 12, yes, because from -4 to 0 is 4 steps. And then from 0 to 8 is 8 steps. So that's a total of 12. So if I'm at -4 and I walk 12 steps in the positive direction, I should end up at +8. Okay, what if I only wanted to go halfway? I just want to go to the midpoint. How many steps am I going to take? I took 12, so then I'm going to take 6, yes. And that will get me to the middle, +6. Well, what's the coordinate? -4 plus 6 is 2. So the x coordinate of the midpoint is 2. Good? Questions? Good? And then I can do the same thing for the y's. If I start off at 2, but I want to end up at 7, I need to go in the positive direction because that's getting larger. And from 2 to 7, that's 5 spaces. So I need to move 5 spaces in the positive direction. So if I only want to go half that distance, then I divide it by 2, right? So 2.5. So plus 2.5. Doesn't matter that it's decimal. Y'all can handle decimals. So then the starting point 2 plus 2.5 is going to give me 4.5. So I found that it's a lot easier. It's exactly the same thing, but whenever we get to quarter distance and 3/4 distance, this is going to be way better. Promise. All right, so M. So you never seen this way? Oh, all right. So my point. Yeah. So the midpoint is at 2 and 4.5. Miss Valdez showed me that years ago. I'm like, never teaching it the formal way again. All right, so this one says, given line AC with coordinates A and midpoint B, find the coordinates of the other endpoint C. That's why you can't just see what's there and do that trick, because this time I'm looking for the other endpoint. I have the midpoint. So when I set this one up, I still start with A at 4, 9. And I'm still ending up at C as my endpoint, but I don't know what C is. This time it tells me B is in the middle. So I know B is the midpoint, and that's at 1, 4. So I'm not looking for the same thing. So I don't set it up in the same way. But I think this way is even easier. If I'm at the end at 4 for the x's, and I want to end up at 1, and I end up at 1, did I go in the positive or negative direction? Negative, right? How many steps in the negative direction did I move? 3. So that gets me halfway. If I want to get all the way to the other side, what do I got to do? The same thing again, right? Because it's halfway. So you could think of like a basketball court or a football field. Those are like, or soccer field. Those are the easiest analogies for me to think about because you know center court, you know 50-yard line, and whatever they call it on a soccer field is in the middle, and it's the same distance on both sides. So if I got from one end zone to the 50-yard line, I have to go the exact same amount of space to get to the other. And if I'm a giant, that's 3 steps. So then 1 minus 3 gives me negative 2. And then for the y's, I got to do the same thing. If I go from 9 to 4, that means I took 5 steps in the negative direction. Or I went minus 5 steps. Maybe I walked backwards. And then from the middle to the other end has to be the same distance. So I'm going to take another minus 5. 4 minus 5 is negative 1. So my other endpoint C is at negative 2, negative 1. Super easy. You'll love it. Questions? No? Okay. So then on the back, we have distance formula, which I just went ahead and gave you the formulas instead of having you write them down. And I want to point out that if you, because these, you can use either one to find D for distance or C, not C squared, but C is the same thing. You're probably already a little familiar with this one. And so I find this one to be simpler. Again, if you're a formula person, because some people are, and you want to go with this route, that's fine. Again, you're going to decide what's point 1 and what is point 2. I put X's and X's, those should be Y's. I just noticed that. Right? No, I'm confused. Yeah, these should be Y's. Well, Y2, Y1. Sorry about that. I just noticed. No one said anything. You'll get the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're solving for D using the distance formula or solving for C using the Pythagorean theorem. You get the same. So find the length of each given segment and determine if they are congruent. That's the question. You have a XY coordinate with some lines on it. So first we're going to find the distance of RS. So over here, here's R and S. So I'm going to do the math for RS. I prefer doing Pythagorean theorem, especially if I already have it on graph paper. So given 2 coordinates, I can make a triangle, a right triangle, like this. And we know one leg will be A, the other leg is B, and the hypotenuse or the long piece is C if we have a right triangle. And it doesn't matter which one you call A or B. It does matter which one you call C, but the A and B don't really matter. I typically go with the short one as A, but that's my method. Okay, so we have this. So we need numbers. It's on a grid, so we can count the boxes. 1, 2, 3. A is 3. B, just count the boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. B is 6. We don't know what C is, and we can't count the boxes because it's slanted. You can only count horizontal or vertical boxes. But we know A squared plus B squared equals C squared. And now we know that A is 3. So 3 squared plus B is 6. 6 squared equals C squared. You can type that in a calculator and just get to what that is. Or 3 squared is 3 times 3, and that's 9. 6 squared is 6 times 6, and that's 36. equals c squared. 9 plus 36 is going to give you 45. And that's still c squared. We're going to take it as far as what is c. So to undo squared, to undo something squared, you take the square root. That's their reciprocal operations, functions. So you take the square root of 45 equals c. Okay? And I'm not really worried about the decimal value of the square root of 45 or the simplified radical form. Now, if you, on your homework assignment, if it gave you a decimal, okay, plug in square root of 45, see if it's the same decimal. But for me, for this class, for notes, I'm just going to there. Okay. So that's RS. C is the square root of 45. I know exactly what that means, right? All right, FG. There's line FG. So over here, I'm doing FG. I need to complete a triangle. It doesn't matter if I go to the left or the right of the triangle to make the triangle. I'm going to go to the right just because there's more space for me to write. But it's the same triangle, whichever way you go with it. So now the bottom is 1, 2 spaces. And if I count going up, it's 5 spaces. And then the red line is C. So I have 2 squared plus 5 squared equals C squared. So 4 plus 25 equals C squared. So 29 equals C squared. Square root of 29 equals C. And the question is, are these congruent? Is the square root of 45 congruent to the square root of 29? Do you think if you typed them in the calculator, you would get the same answer? I see one person shaking their head. So everybody else isn't sure? Do I need to get the calculator out and try it? Do you think you would get the same thing if you typed in the square root of 29 as the square root of 45? No, of course not. Thank you. Yeah, it's, I just asked if it's the same number. Is this the same number? No, it's not the same number. It doesn't matter that we don't know what that decimal is. I don't know without thinking about it for more than a minute what it would be. But I know it's not going to be the same. And that was the question of the problem. Are they congruent? And so I'm going to do the congruent symbol. And then I'll put a big line through it because no, they're not. My pen is making me mad today. Like the square root of 3.5? If I did, I didn't mean to. Yeah, no, it's a good question. Oh, no. Oh, absolutely, it won't be on a test. It'll be the most basic. I am really not trying to test too much of your algebra skills. Or you do have to have some of them to be proficient in this class, but that's not my main focus on testing. Is do you know the geometry part of it? Yes, you have to have, because building layers, you have to have some of the algebra. But my focus is, do you understand the relationship in the space? Spatial relations. So it'll probably be something relatively simple. Most of the time, I like your homework questions to be a little more on the harder side than your test questions. And your review is going to be almost exactly like the test, equal level as the test. So you should always do your review for my class because I'll give you a worked out answer key to the review too. I don't take it for a grade because it's really more of a gift than it is an assignment. I give it to you to show you what to expect for the test, and I show you how to do them all. So that's why I don't take it for a grade. But your grade is going to be higher on your test if you work through and study the review. Okay, so next one, JK and FG. We got FG. OJK, that one in pink. Here's J, here's K. I'm going to go to the top on this one for my triangle because there's more space to write. So that's 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5. So C is here. So for JK, I have 2 squared plus 5 squared equals C squared. Wait a minute, that sounds really familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, that was exactly what I did right there. So that means that this is going to be the same too. Square root of 29 equals C. Look at that, just saved a lot of work. And then it said FG. Well, FG, I already did that too. This is FG. So that's the same. So this is the same. Square root of 29 equals C. So are they congruent? They are. Okay, and then there's one more that is to use the distance formula and Pythagorean theorem to find the distance to the nearest tenth. Hey, you're fine. Thank you, ma'am. All right, so those we just did all those with Pythagorean theorem. So we do need to do one at least with the distance formula. So we're going to do it both ways. All right, I'm going to do the Pythagorean first, the way we just did it. My graph would not print into my OneNote for some reason. So 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's point D. And 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's point E. And there is my line. All right. So the way we just did it, we're going to do the same thing again for DE. So I need to complete my triangle. All right, so counting from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces on the bottom flat side. And then counting up, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 spaces. And that's going to tell me what C is. So 5 squared plus 9 squared equals C squared. 5 times 5 is 25. 9 times 9 is 81. And that is C squared. So this is 106 is C squared. So the square root of 106 is C. All right, so then we're going to do distance formula and see if we get the same thing. So the distance formula, D equals the square root. You have x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. All right, so again, I need to label these. At point D, we'll go ahead and call that point 1. So this is x1, y1. And then we're going to call point E point 2. So this is x2, y2. All right, so I like to fill in everything except for my blanks. Square root, parentheses, blank, minus blank, parentheses squared, plus parentheses blank, minus blank, parentheses squared. I find that makes it easier whenever you're using a formula, or even put in blank parentheses if that helps you. So x2, Looking back up here at x2, I labeled that point E. The x value of point E is -2. And then the next blank is x1. That's the x value of point D. That is 3. And then I have y2. As point E, y value is -5. And then the y value of point 1, which is the D, is 4. It sounded like it was really complicated. So I just plugged in, according to the formula, x's and y's. If you label them, then plugging them in makes them easier than thinking through which one is x1, y1, because it confuses me too. I always label them. Don't feel like if you label them, I don't know, it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. All right, so now I'm going to simplify. D equals, I know I'm doing the square root last. So in here, parentheses before the exponent. So I have -2 minus 3. That's -5. And that's going to be squared plus -5 minus 4 is -9. And that's going to be squared. So now I have -5 squared, which is -5 times -5 is 25, plus -9 times -9 is 81. And whenever it's under a radical like that, technically there should be parentheses around it. So now I still have order of operations saying to deal with the 25 plus 81 first. So D equals the square root of 106. And look at that, they're the same, which was the whole point. This and this are the same. Okay. All right, so you do have an online assignment to go with this.